Daf Yomi is Sanhedrin Chafalov, Sanhedrin 21. The daf is dedicated for Shemir for the Chayyim Matzah for the Shviyim and Yeshua for Am Yisrael. We're going to start on the Mishnah on Chafalov Amud Aleph as we continue the discussion of the laws of the king. And it says in the Torah, the pasuk says in Deuteronomy, it says about a king, "Will yarbo nashim," a king is not allowed to have too many wives, but will yasser with vavo, and his heart may not be led astray. Because if it's zahav yarbel mode, and he cannot have too much gold or silver. So it says the Mishnah yarbel nashim. When it says he can't have too many wives, what does that mean? What's too many wives? Elish monasar. Right? The king can only have 18 wives. 18 is not too many. Rabbi Yehuda says marbulo. He can have as many as he wants. Bavachli and mesiris aslibo. He can have as many as he wants as long as they don't lead him astray. Rabbi Shimon Omer afilu achas. He said, even if there's one, if that one leads him astray, he can't marry her. What does it mean he can't have too many wives? Even if that one extra wife is as good as Abigail, he can't marry her. There's a whole discussion here amongst the Rishonim, which we're not going to go into now, seeing is this a three-way dispute in the Mishnah, or is it just a two-way dispute as to what exactly the Tanna Kama is saying? So Rabbi Yehuda is saying that you can have as many as you want as long as they don't. The king can have as many as they want as wives as he wants as long as they don't lead him astray. And Rabbi Shimon saying, no, you can't go even one over. Well, Maimer, the Rabbi Yehuda darish time of the cross. So Rabbi Yehuda, who says you can have as many wives as you want as long as you don't be led astray, because the pasuk says don't have too many wives so that you're not led astray. So Rabbi Yehuda is saying, well, if you're not led astray, then you can have as many as you want. So Rabbi Yehuda must be expounding, saying we need to understand the reasoning of the verses. For Rabbi Shimon, Darish time is covered. Rabbi Shimon says, no, we have to be exact. Not too many. It doesn't matter if they lead you astray. But I have question mean a little, but actually elsewhere we learn the opposite. We actually mentioned Rabbi Shimon's position earlier in our own tractate. But elsewhere we learned the opposite, because the time we learned to the Brisa, Almana bein she aniya bein she ashira. We know about a widow. It says in the Brisa it says about a widow that it says about a widow that you're not allowed to take her garment as a pawn. So it says about a widow, bein she aniya bein she ashira. So the Brisa says it doesn't matter if she's rich or poor, you can't take a collateral from her, as it says, "L'tachbol beged almana." You can't take the garment of a widow as a collateral. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's the position of Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Shimon Omer, Ashira memashkenos aniya memashkenos. Rabbi Shimon says, if she's rich, you could take the collateral from her, but not if she's poor. Why? Because what's the reason? Because you have to return the collateral to her if she's poor. And so if she's poor, you're going to cause her to have a bad name. What's he talking about? Because you take the collateral from her, you're going to have to return it to her. Every night you're bringing her back her clothing, and every morning you're taking it back from her. People see you coming into the widow's house every night and every morning. It's going to cause problems. So Rabbi Shimon found the reason behind the verse, and he says it's only a problem to take a collateral from a widow if she's poor, but not if she's rich. So Rabbi Yehuda says you can't take it at all. So we see from that price that Rabbi Yehuda lo darish time in the car, Rabbi Shimon darish time in the car. So it's the opposite. So there Rabbi Yehuda says we don't expound the reasoning, and Rabbi Shimon says we do. But we're in our case over here, we're saying the opposite. So the Gemara says, Bi'alma, Rabbi Yehuda lo darish time in the car. In general, Rabbi Yehuda does not expound the reasoning behind the verses. Shani Alcha, this case is different. The Mefarish time of the Kra. This case is different because the verse literally says the reasoning for the verse. The pasuk literally says, "My time will yarbo anashim mishum lo yaser libo." So Rabbi Yehuda says that here it literally says, "What's the reason a king cannot have too many wives?" So there's not led astray. So here in our case, it's literally the reason is given in the pasuk. So of course we have to apply the reasoning. Rabbi Shimon says, no, Milchti ba'alma darshin and Talmud Kar. Rabbi Shimon said the opposite. He says, since in general, we explain the reasoning behind the verses, Ma'atam o yarbo nashim, so therefore, Im Kain Lichtov Kravo Yarbo Nashim Wishok. If that's the case, let the Torah just right. You can't have too many wives. You wouldn't have to say the reason. Vana Mina my time, and I would have known the reason. Well, Yarbo Mishum Lo Yasser. I would have said the reason is because we don't want you to be led astray. So if that's the case, Lo Yasser, Emily, why does it specify Lo Yasser? I feel Achas Mesira Slibo Areza Lo Yisiana. Even if it's one who's a bad wife, you can't marry her. Aramani Mekayim Lo Yarbo. What does it mean when it says Lo Yarbo? That feel Kabigal, even if she's a great wife, and it's too many, it's above 18, you can't marry her. So the Gemara says, what's the source for this idea of 18? Hani Shmona Asrei Menon. What's the source for the idea of 18 wives being too many? It says in the Pasuk, Vayivaldu David, it was born to David, Banim B'Chevron, children of Chevron. And now it's going to list the 6 wives and their children. Vahi B'Choro Amnon, Rachinoma Yisraelis. That's one. Mishneu Kilav. Kilav is one of the 4 people who never sinned, David's son. And that was to Kalav was to Ashes Ravigal Ashes Navol Kamalin. The third one was Shlishis Avshalom Memacha. The third was Avshalom, and the Revi was Adoniah Chagit. Fourth was Adoniah, the son of Chagit. V'chamishi Shefatia ben Avital, and the 6th one Ashisha Yitraim leEgla Ashes David. These are the ones who were born to David and Hebron. The Kamarle Navi, and the prophet said to David, and if you have, I'll give to you like this and like this. And so there we see from here, kahina is shis. One like this is 6. Vichahina, another kahina is another 6. Shis, Davud, Tamisrei. So we have 18. So Masku Ravina, Ema, kahina, Tartisrei, Vichahina, Esra, Arba. Maybe the first chahina means I'll give you like this, meaning you'll have 12. And the next one is like this 12. So then you get 24. So, and Tanya Namiyachi, well, Yabo Nashim Yosam Yasar. Indeed, we have a source that says can't have more than 24. But then there's a position that expounds above. Arba'im Mishmona, add on another double. And Tanya Namiyachi, Yabo Nashim Yosam Arba'im Mishmona. You have 48. But Tana Didan, my time, Tana Didan, my time. But what's the reason why our Tana says 18? Amrav Tana Makish Kahina Bas, okay, in a comma. Compares the word first kaina to the latter one. Ma kaina kama shis, just like the first one is 6. Af kaina basra shis. Versus Vave Michal. But what about Michal, the daughter of Shaul? We know that David married her. Amarav Eglah, the 6th wife mentioned in the pasuk, whose name was Eglah. That's also another name for Michal. V'lama nekroshma zum Michal. V'lama nekroshma Eglah. Why did he call her Eglah? Shechaviva lavke Eglah. She was like a calf to him. That's how precious she was. Shimshon says, you're not plowed with my calf. You see, calf is a term of affection for one's paramour. But how could we say Yitraim was the son of Michal, but Michal didn't have children? It says in the pasuk that after she rebuked David, she had no children until she died. So how did she have Yitraim as a child? Yeah, she didn't have until the day she died, but she had on the day she died. So that's not a possible explanation. Well, where do we count these kids? In Hebron. Whereas the actions of Michal happened in Jerusalem, because that was when David was bringing in the ark and dancing. So all of his energy, and she was disgusted. And she sees the day. You remember which Haftarah we read this for? It's Haftarah. So she looked, Michal, the daughter of Shaul, looks out the window and she sees David dancing, and she would despise him. And Rav Yosef says that Michal at that moment took the punishment, because meaning to say she got punished because, and she had no more children. And so therefore, this was the payment of her sin, meaning to say, from that moment on, she had no more children. But prior to this, she had. She had prior to that, but that moment on, she didn't have. But can't be. Gemara says, David owed. So the Gemara is saying, let's talk about David's wives. It says, David owed It says David took other concubines and wives in Jerusalem. Well, the Gemara says, yeah, that was from Miloi Shmonas, but that was to get to 18. My Nashim, my Pilakshim. What's the difference between a wife and a concubine? Amar Yehuda Marav, Nashim B'Ksuva, B'Kedushin, Pilakshim, Below Ksuva, Below Kedushin. Wives have a betrothal and a kedushin is like a formal betrothal, and a ksuva and a ksuva pilagshim, concubines below ksuva, below kedushin. They don't have ksuva or kedushin. It's a little bit difficult for Rashi because elsewhere Rashi says that a pilagish has kedushin and no ksuva, so that's a little bit of a Rashi has to explain it. But also, pilagshim is a concubine, and what you have to, even though we're not going to go into it now, there's a very often in the discussion of Pilagshim, it's often cited a tshuva of Rav Yaakov Emden, who argue that we should bring back the Pilagshim. Case where a man and woman are looking for a relationship, but they're not looking to get married. He encouraged bringing back the concept of a Pilagish, but it never really caught on. Every once in a while, somebody pokes up their head and says, maybe we should have such a arrangement, but it's really not mainstream. Amar Yehuda Marav. David had 400 children. The commentaries say it doesn't mean that these were David's children, but it means that he captured them in battle. What's a Yafas Toar? Yafas Toar is a woman from a foreign nation that you capture in battle, and you're allowed to marry her, but first you have to convert her. There's a dispute between Rashi and Ramban whether you're allowed to be with her before you convert her. Rashi says you first have to convert her, and then you can be with her. You can convert her against her will. That approach of Rashi is problematic because it seems to go against the text of the Gemara over here below, so that's a challenge. Well, we'll go on. So David had 400 Yafas Toar children, these children who were caught in battle, who were from these women who were captive. They grew their hair long like the enemy. They all sat in golden wagons, and they were the heads of the army units. They were David's like Navy SEALs. Tamar, we know that we're going to get into a deep dive of the story of Amnon and Tamar. David had two children. One was Amnon, one was Tamar, and Amnon sexually assaulted Tamar. So this is a horrible story, and we're going to go into it now. So first, Rav says Tamar was one of these children who was the daughter of this captured woman. As it says, so we know that it says that Amnon said, that Tamar said to her brother Amnon, speak to the king and he will not hold you back from me. Meaning, say Amnon wanted to force himself on Tamar. Tamar said, first, do it with permission, get permission. David will allow it. But if she was really his daughter, she never would have been permitted. She was his sister. She wasn't really Amnon's sister. She was the daughter of a Yafas Toar, of this captured woman. And so therefore she was born before her mother converted. And so she wasn't Amnon's sister. Gemara says, well, Amnon Rea Ushmo Yonadav ben Shema Achi David Ish Chacham. So Amnon had a friend whose name was Yonadav ben Shema, the brother of David. And Yonadav was very wise. Amar Yehuda Marav Ish Chacham Risha. He was wickedly wise. He was wicked. And he said to Amnon, Maduata Kachadal ben Amelch. Why are you so weak? Meaning, say, what's the matter with you? So Yonadav gave advice to Amnon, make believe you're sick and ask her to prepare food for you. And then she's going to make the food in front of me to fix it. And she took the frying pan and she poured the food in front of him. And Amar Rav Yehuda Marav, she had to be fried food, otherwise the plan wouldn't have worked to assault Tamar. He said, make me fresh fried food, and therefore she had to come into the house to prepare for him. And after he was with her, after he forced himself on her, he hated her. Pirkei Avos says that if the love is based upon something specific, once that something specific goes away, the love is going to disappear. And that's why Amnon, after he was with her, he hated her. Amnon Tzina Gedola Ma'od. My time, what's the reason? Rabbi Yitzchak Nima Nikshurlo. She mutilated him with one of her hairs. Va'asato krut shifcha. She mutilated his genitalia. So the Gemara says, well, if one of her hairs got stuck on him, what did she actually do? It just happened. No, she deliberately took one of her hairs, tied it around him, and mutilated him. Aini, is that really the case? Then Rabbi say, it says in the verse in Yechezkel that the Jewish women are known for their beauty, that they do not have any hair in their private areas. So how did Tamar have her hair there to mutilate him? So Shari Tamar about Sifas Torah. Yeah, Tamar, she was not born Jewish, so she had this practice of having these hairs, and she used that to mutilate Amnon. It says, Tamar So after Tamar was assaulted, she put ashes on her head, and she took a special garment that she had, which was given the same name as Yosef's garment, called the Ketonet Pasim, and she tore it. At that moment, Tamar made a very big, she caused there to be a new reform. A reform was made in the law. Amru, that when the Jewish people saw that this is what happened to Tamar, they said, if this will happen to the daughters of the kings, if they can be assaulted in this manner, what could happen to the daughters of regular, common people? If this happens to a modest woman like Tamar, so women who are not as modest, how much more so? And at that moment, they made a decree that you're not allowed to be secluded with a married woman, and you're not allowed to be secluded with an unmarried woman. The Gemara says that was a decree. Right, so it's a biblical law. How do we know is that there's a prohibition against, biblically speaking, against seclusion? When the brother of your mother will lead to a shevach, ben emi mesis ben av, you know mesis, ben misyachedim imo ve'in acher misyachedim imo. Meaning say ein acher misyachedim kol rash b'torah. A son can be secluded with his mother, but not with any of the other relatives. He's not allowed to be secluded. So basically, the poskim saying, like a brother and a sister should not even share an apartment together. They shouldn't live in an apartment together, just the two of them. So they made a decree about seclusion with an unmarried woman because of Tamar. So since we're expounding David's children, we go into here. Adoniah, the son of Chagit, exalted himself, saying, I will reign. This is actually the story starts in this week's Haftorah. So the succession. So what happened here? He wanted to be a ruler, but the crown wouldn't fit because there was a special shape of the crown. It would only fit the descendants of David. And so Adoniah made for himself a chariots and a parade of 50 men. The Gemara says, Marabusa, what's the big deal? 50 men. That's no big deal. No, these men were special forces. They took out their spleens so that they could run quicker. They believe the spleens slowed them down, and also they cut away the soles of their feet and just at the bone, and that allowed them to run faster. Well, Yar below Susim El Kedem Markovto. You're not allowed to have too many horses. If you're the king, you're only allowed to have enough for your chariots. You can't have too much silver and gold, only enough to pay the wages of your workers, of your soldiers. And he has to write his own Torah. He goes out to battle, Motziaimo, he takes the Torah with him. Nichnas, when he comes back home, Humachnisaimo, he brings it back with him. Yoshev Bedin, when he sits down to judge, the the Torah is with him. Mesev, he kenegdo. When he reclines, the Torah is with him, as it says, and he'll recline all the days of his life. There's a little similar, there's a question here, like Jeff asked yesterday. How could the king judge? Didn't we start off the chapter saying, Melch, no? So the king does not judge, and we don't judge him. So there's several answers. One is that maybe it's talking about monetary laws, that the king is allowed to do monetary laws. Another possibility is that we're talking about when it says you can't judge, that's the kings of Israel, like Yanai, but the kings of David were allowed to judge. And a third possibility is the Meiri said we're talking about it are things relating to the king, which he is able to be the judge about. So Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, well, Yarbalo Susim, you now have too many horses. Yacha Fil Kademikapto, Uparashav. Talmud, well, I might think he can't even have horses for his chariots. It says for him. Lo ain't Omar, but for himself he can't have Omarbu Kadei Rechbo Parashav. But he could have more for his chariots. Hamani Mekayim Susim. So what do I do with the fact that it says horses? Susim Habatlanin. That means you can't just have horses that are just around, like you have like a fleet of horses that you don't use. How do I know if you have even one horse and it's not moving and you're not being using it, you're in violation? Talmud Omer, Haman Harbos Sus. So if that's the case, if even one idle horse is a violation of the prohibition, why does it say susim? It could just say sus. The Gemara says, Lavor alav say I'll call sus for sus. It'll give you a separate prohibition for every horse. Time of the code, it says he can't have for himself. Without that, I would say that so you mean to say if it wouldn't say for himself, I would have said that he can't even have horses for his own army, but that's not a possibility. He must have no. Means to say he's allowed to have as many horses as he wants for his army, but we might have thought he could just have the bare minimum, but he's not allowed to have as many as he wants for his own army. The case of his he can't have too much silver and gold. I might think he can't even have enough money to pay his army. He can't have for himself too much, but he can have enough to pay his army. Time of the cuts of Rahman low. So it's because the Torah writes word low. But if it didn't say that, I would have said not even enough to pay his army. That doesn't make sense. So Gemara says, no, you could have as much money as you want for your army. So now that we're expounding the word low, what do you do with the word well, we can't have too many wives for himself. So a non-king can have as many wives as he wants. Just the king is limited to the 18. Review the Ramik Sif. So review the through two verses against each other. It says, Shlomo had 40,000 stables for his horses. And another verse says that he had Orvus Susim. Another verse says he had 4,000 stables. Okay, if there were 40,000 stables, and each one had 4,000 horses within it. And if he had 4,000, rows of horses in each, he had stables. And each one had 40,000 rows of horses. I don't know. What? Maybe it's like Ramik Siv. And Ketzav Nechshav B'mei Shlomo U'Me'uma. There's two contradictory verses. One verse says that the money was not worth anything in the time of Shlomo. Miksiv Vayitenu Shlomo as a Kesef B'Yerushalayim. And Shlomo gave the money in Jerusalem, Kavanim was like stones. So one verse, there was it was useless silver. There was so much of it, it was worth nothing. One says it was worth something, but not a lot. So kasha kan kodem shenasa shlomo es pasparo, kan la'achar shenasa shlomo es pasparo. Once he married Bathsheba, then money started to be less scarce. That was punishment. Amar Yitzchak v'shah shenasa shlomo es pasparo. When at that moment when Shlomo married the daughter of Pharaoh, Yared Gabriel v'notz kana b'yam. Gabriel went down, planted a reed in the sea, v'hela sirton. And at that moment, basically sand began to gather around that reed, and an island formed. That's where Rome was built. That was the beginning of the end. When Solomon married Bathsheba, the beginning of the end. Why does the Torah not tell us all the reasons? This is something everyone should remember. Why does the Torah not give us all the reasons for the Torah? There were there were two verses where the commandments were given, and the greatest, wisest man in the world stumbled in them. Says you're not allowed to have too many wives. Shlomo says, don't worry, I know the reason, so you don't go astray. Well, I'll take more wives, and don't worry, I won't go astray. And yet, when he got older, the women led him astray. He says, can't have too many horses. Shlomo says, what's the reason why you can't have too many horses? So you don't go back to Egypt. That's why you can't have too many horses. So Solomon says, I'll have horses. Don't worry, I won't bring the people back. Except in the end, it says that in the end he brought the people back to Egypt. He went back to Egypt. He brought. It says in the pasuk, you're not allowed to have too many horses, so that you don't bring the people back to Egypt. Egypt was the place where people wanted to get the horses. The code safe. They buy him. They buy him from the Egyptians. Egyptian horses, Arabian knife or something. Code safe a milk sefer Torah, which when the king writes a Torah scroll. Tanam b'vachol yisnah bishal avosav. As long as he does not basically exalt himself through the Torah scroll of his fathers, he has to write a new Torah scroll. He can't rely upon the one he got. Even though a person's Torah scroll was left to him from his fathers, he has to write his own. It's a mitzvah for him to write his own. Even though you get a Torah, you have to write your own. It says, write for yourselves in this song. Doesn't it mean that this only applies to the king? No, it's to tell us the king requires 2 Torahs. Nobody's allowed to fulfill the mitzvah by getting the Torah from their parents, but the king has to have 2 Torahs. It's a Mishnah, Torah, Kosev Lishmo Shtei Torahs. He has to write 2 Torah scrolls. 2 Torah scrolls. One that goes out and in with him, and one that he leaves in his treasury. I heard from Rabbi Rosner, he said that he didn't say who he heard it from, that one Torah goes out to the world, that's like not as pure. Then there's the Torah, you come back, you have to have the pure Torah back in its original place. So, because when you go out in the world, you're being like a king, you're going to have to make all these compromises. He makes like an amulet for Toa Bezro and he hangs it on his arm. So that was either a micro Torah written very small, or else we could say that was a Torah scroll that was not actually the entire Torah. Tosa says maybe it was just the 10 Commandments. However, he wouldn't take with him into the bath or the toilet. Place is appropriate to read with. So this is reminds us of a passage we had already in Gemara. Trying to remember which Gemara. Maybe it was Sukkah. You got to remember. But it says when the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, Nitna Torah Yisrael b'Chsav Ivri. Originally, it was given in what was called Ksav Ivri. The writing was called Ivri, on the other side of the Jordan, V'Lashon HaKodesh, and it was written in Hebrew. The Chazar Nitna b'Mei Ezra, but then in time of Ezra, it was given b'Ktav Ashuris, which is today we use. It's called Ktav Ashuris, V'Lashon HaKodesh. V'Nichu Ha'Jotos Ktav Ivris V'Lashon Arami, and the Torah was left over for the regular people to have it in Ktav Ivris, which is not what we use today, and in Aramaic. What? Yisrael is the Jewish people. Hajotos are the non-Jews. Man Hajotos. Well, that's what we're going to say now. Man Hajotos. Who are the Hajotos? And Rav Chisda Kutai. These are the Kutayim. Maybe it's not the actual Kutayim. Maybe it's the Samaritans. Kutai is a word that's often substituted by censors. It could just be the non-Jews. Yeah, but I'm saying it's not 100%. Do they have a source for that? Okay. So I'm my Ksav Ivris, I'm Rav Chisda Ksav Libona. So the Ksav Ivris, Rashi says Ksav Libona. Rashi says these are large letters like those that they write in the amulets and the mezuzahs. But the large letters is the same script, so it's not 100% clear what Rashi is saying. So the Rishonim say that there was in the land of Israel and around it a script that was found by this. That's why they say the Samaritans, and they live in Shechem, and they have ancient Sefer Torahs, and they write in a different script. The Rambam also says this, so that's what Rashi is referring to, like the Samaritan Torah. Anybody ever been to that place? I was there one time, where they do their own Korban Pesach. I'm sure. Yeah. So I wanted to just say one thing about this. Rashi says that you write on kamios and mezuzos, right, on amulets and mezuzos. So we today, it used to be the practice that they would write on these like mystical names, like angels, on the back of mezuzahs. Rambam was very against it. Today, when you write a mezuzah, on the back of it, we write Shaddai. And anybody know what else we write? You write Kuzu b'muchsos Kuzu. If you look at the back of a Megillah, it says Kuzu b'muchsos Kuzu. What is that? That's one letter above. It's written on the back of where it says Hashem Elokeinu Hashem. Kuzu b'muchsos Kuzu. So you write one letter each above the Shem of the Shem. Yud, you write Chaf, and so that's how you spell it out. It's a mystical reasoning. And okay, I want to just say before we stop that at 9 we have a couple of things